Hi, and welcome to another edition of One-on-One brought to you by Citi. I'm Howie Rose, and today we are going to check in with member of the Mets Alumni Association, pitcher Pat Zachry. And before we get started, I want to remind you, as always, that since 2016, for each Mets home run hit at Citi Field, Citi has donated $2,000 to No Kid Hungry. Now, while we anxiously await more Mets home runs at Citi Field, Citi and the Citi Foundation have continued to support No Kid Hungry, providing $7 million in support just since March. New estimates show that 1 in 4 children in the United States could face hunger this year because of the coronavirus. So now, more than ever, we ask you to join Citi in the fight against childhood hunger. To donate, visit nokidhungry.org/Citi. And now to reconnect with Pat Zachry, which is a welcome occasion, because can you remember the last time that you made an appearance or did anything, Pat, on behalf of the Mets?
It's been several years, probably since before 2016 when I had that accident.
Which we'll touch on briefly a little bit later on, but I think in order to put your time with the Mets in perspective, we need to actually go back before it started, back to when you came up with the Cincinnati Reds and was the co-rookie of the year in 1976, ironically with a pitcher who would later become a teammate of yours with the Mets,
Yeah.
Butch Metzger. But let me just kind of position this. 1976, you're a rookie, you're pitching for a world championship club, a veteran team for the most part that was in the prime of its existence as the Big Red Machine. As a rookie, knowing the support you had behind you with all those big hitters, how much easier, if you will, did that make breaking into the big leagues?
It didn't. Sparky had no patience for rookies. And for the most part, neither did Larry Shepard, a pitching coach. If you could not throw strikes and keep it down around the knees, adios. They get you out of there.
So how was it that Sparky came to accept you?
I kept
Sparky Anderson, of course.
Kept it down on the knees and beat the Dodgers 5 times that first year. So they like me.
That'll do it. What was it about Sparky as a personality that made it difficult for him to connect with younger players?
I didn't see that. He had his way of doing it. And there was the same way with all veteran managers. My way or the highway. Do it like you're supposed to, which is how I want it done, or get the heck out of here. You know, they got plenty of plane tickets laying around for you somewhere.
Well, you certainly earned your stripes as a Red, and that year, 1976, the Reds would face the Yankees in the World Series, and Pat pitched Game 3 at Yankee Stadium. You won, go up 3-0. The team completed the sweep for their second straight world title the next night. But what are your takeaways when you think back to standing on the mound at Yankee Stadium, World Series? What are your takeaways specifically from that game?
I had my mother and dad, my sister and my niece up in the nosebleed section. And everything that came together from Little League, teenage ball, high school ball, kind of getting started on my grandfather's knee, and everything that you come up with, all the stops along the way, all the bad games and the good games and just the whole process. Everything led to that one moment in that one spot. And I didn't really feel like there was any way I was going to lose.
You know, hearing you talk about all those things that led up to that night reminds me of what Steve Blass, the former pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates and longtime broadcaster, he told me a story years and years ago. He wound up winning Game 7 of the 1971 World Series for the Pirates against the Orioles at Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. And it was a close game, a one-run game, as I recall. And he said that when he got to the mound to begin the ninth inning, he felt the enormity of a lot of what you just described starting to seep into his head, and he needed to kind of reset. So he walked around behind the mound, looked up at Memorial Stadium, accepted the significance of the moment, and let all that stuff kind of filter through. Did you have a moment like that during that game?
Well, the first guy up is Mickey Rivers, and he hits one of those little swinging bunts that goes dribbling down toward first base, and I went running over to field it, and I wasn't used to the natural grass. Well, the riverfront had AstroTurf, and you could slide just slightly. And when I tried that, well, of course, I kind of stumbled and almost fell on my nose. And when I threw the ball, I hit Mickey in the rear end. And I was lucky that that happened because it kept the ball from going running down into right field and him going to second base. And, you know, as luck would have it, I looked up on the very next play and he was a little bit too far off and I picked him off. So you could have dropped a pin in that place and hurt it. And,
so that was your big moment, one batter into the game, really.
Oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, it was almost as though I could hear my mom and dad and my sister and the nosebleed going, yeah.
You got him. So it works out.
Well,
you win that game.
You know, then I go in there and I face Jim Mason after 6 2/3, and I throw him one I shouldn't have, and he hits it out of the ballpark. Well, son of a gun, if he don't get traded the next year, we're going to Montreal. And what's he do? He hits another one home run off.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Same guy gets another pinch hit home run. I threw my glove at him.
All right, so look, it ends wonderfully for you. You win the game. The next night, you win the World Series. And you're a co-rookie of the year and a world champion all at once. And so 1977 comes around, you've got these big expectations. And lo and behold, we get to June of 77. Now, I want to take you back about a week before the trade, capital T on both words, of course. You're facing Seaver, Tom Seaver, at Shea Stadium. It would turn out to be Seaver's last appearance, his last start at Shea Stadium in his first go-around with the Mets. And he pitches a shutout, and everybody knows what's going on, that there's a trade brewing, that Tom singularly could put the brakes on it if he finds a way to come to some sort of an agreement with the front office. And he received several ovations that night. The crowd was basically pleading for him to stay. And while that's going on, did you have any idea that night that your name had already been circulating in a potential trade that would consummate a week later?
No, they wanted Raleigh Eastwick, and Raleigh wouldn't go. He wouldn't go.
Do you know, was he in the original trade and he turned it down?
As far as I can remember, yeah, that's kind of the way it came up. And
they didn't have 10 and 5 rights.
I didn't have that luxury, so they said, well, we'll take this kid. And you knew the rest. I was about to get married, and then that all got put on hold.
Yeah, we got to talk about that a little bit, because wasn't Pete Rose was planning a big party, a wedding reception for you at his house. Was he not?
See, Pete, he and his wife were such good people to me and his family. And we'd go on the road, and he fussed at me about leaving the dog in a kennel. He said, bring him over to my house. I've got this big backyard and 2 kids and a wife to take care of him. He was a real gentle mixed breed German Shepherd. And we'd pull up to the airport gate, and the old dog would have his head leaning out of the window, drooling all over the place and hair blowing all over. And this is Pete's Rolls Royce that we're in. And the next day, he'd be sitting all the way at one end of the locker room, and he'd look up with a bunch of writers sitting around him, and he'd, Zach, you know that dog took a crap in the back of my Rolls Royce last night? And he never let me live it down. But they took care of me. Sharon and I were going to have the wedding at a justice of the peace. Go to Pete and Carolyn's for the reception. And then
that was the plan.
The trade happened. She has just driven her car, the little 70 Carmen Ghia convertible, up to Cincinnati. And honey, you know, you got to get yours shipped back to Waco and get mine shipped to New York. And I got to leave in the morning and go to New York. And I'll be back in a couple of days. And if you'll still have me, we'll get married. And I'll meet you in a few days up in Chicago. And we'll kind of carry on from there. And that led to almost 40 years.
You make that sound, the lead up, almost anticlimactic. Because, not anticlimactic, but almost as though you took it, you know, in stride, which couldn't have been that easy. You know, forget about the wedding for a moment. You're going from a world championship team to one that was clearly about to begin what would be a lengthy rebuilding process. How did you reconcile all of that between the wedding and the trade?
It was nice to know that I was a pitcher that people in New York were interested in. On the other hand, it was a shock because I thought my baseball future was in Cincinnati, having done so well there. But that was all a business decision. And when I went in to get my papers to leave, and I sat down with the general manager, Dick Wagner, he more or less insulted my wife and I, my soon-to-be wife, with one tacky little remark that he made that made my wife, fiance at the time, kind of reach to the table and grab and squeeze it and say, don't do that. Don't go there. So it was time to get up and leave. So we did. We just said, okay, let me have the paper. I'll sign it. Goodbye. Good riddance.
Jeez.
And everything went okay. They were glad to have us in New York. Joe Torre was great, wonderful. So was Rube Walker. The guys on the team were wonderful. They were nice enough not to put me in Seaver's locker right next to it. But, you know, New York was okay. We just didn't win a whole lot. And when I was having the best season of my life there, I got stupid. I went brain dead after that game with Pete and walked in and kicked the helmet, and I missed it, and I hung the spike, and I broke my foot. And that cost me 2 years, basically.
We need to explain that, Pat. We need to explain that a little bit, because for those who might either be too young to remember or simply don't remember, 1978, Pete Rose is beginning to threaten Joe DiMaggio's all-time hitting streak of 56 straight games. And as he was getting to the National League record, the Reds came through Shea Stadium. And number 37, the game that would be his 37th consecutive game, was a hit, was pitched by Pat for the Mets against the Reds. And you got him about 2 or 3 times before he got that hit, which led to the injury. Am I right?
I think he was either 0 for 2 or 0 for 3 up to that point. And he got the hit. And, you know, it was like pitching pennies against your best friend at home, or playing horse or something like that. You know, you want to beat. You want to beat him. You want to win. And that's the way it was with me and Pete. And I just dadgummit. I kicked at the helmet, and of all the dumb things I ever did, I missed it. Spike hung. Boy, it just crushed the navicular bone in my foot. And once the bone got healed, well, then I had the elbow misery come up.
Did one come from the other?
No.
Did you compensate for any pain in the foot by changing anything in your motion which might have affected the elbow?
Eventually, a tendon in the back drew up, shortened up, caused me to have surgery when I had the funny bone nerve rerouted down through the forearm. I don't have a funny bone in there.
So you don't feel anything there, huh?
Nah, it's through my forearm. But, you know, it was just one of those things. And we had Neil Allen and Mike Scott and Jeff Reardon and a whole slew of other pitchers coming up. They were still pitching real well. Matlack, Kuzma were still there.
Yeah.
You know, we had decent staff. We just couldn't get a whole lot of guys hitting wise.
How much did those guys, and you mentioned Kuzma and Matlack, who were pitchers for, well, in Matlack's case, the 73 National League champs, and Kuzma, 69 world champs, as well as 73. So they'd been firmly embedded successfully into Mets history, never mind just within that clubhouse. As they saw Tom Seaver leave and a bunch of young kids come to replace him, or at least to, you know, compensate for the trade, what effect did they have, either or both of them, on you, on helping you as a pitcher, if at all?
Well, it was, you know, communication, studying on the bench, also with Rube and Joe.
Rube Walker, the pitching coach, yeah.
And going over these things all the time. No different than we did anywhere else when I was with Cincinnati or any of the other teams I played with. We always studied these things and compared notes with other players.
You know, you mentioned that they didn't give you Seaver's exact locker, but you took his spot in the rotation. And I know that for a long time after the trade, it would always come up. And whether it was just an innocent question after a game about whether taking Seaver's spot in the rotation, or even a year or two later about just the reflections on having been included in a trade for an eventual Hall of Famer, was that any kind of a burden to carry for any length of time for you?
Oh, after a while, you got tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame even if he retires today, was kind of the feeling. So let's get over all that horse manure and let me get on with my life, and we'll see what happens from there. Don't write me off yet. I'm just, you know, this is my second year and I ain't even got through one yet. So give me a minute. Let me catch my breath.
Did you feel at any time the media treated you unfairly because you were part of the Seaver trade and maybe the expectations were unrealistically high?
I don't know. You know, that's the way media is in New York.
One thing I remember.
You don't get me to lie about that now.
What? Yeah.
It comes with territory. But unfortunately, you don't get schooled on that in the minor leagues or even in college unless you get courses for it. Biggest crowd we ever had probably was in Double-A a few times. And that was in Canada, and you couldn't understand what they were saying anyway.
One thing I remember in covering the Mets in those days and being in the clubhouse after games was how very pragmatic you were about your own performances. I can remember you pitching, I think it was back-to-back shutouts at one point in 1980, right in the middle of the season. And I mean, you looked about unhittable for you do
4 in a row.
Shutouts? Okay, so I'm thinking of a couple at home specifically. And you tell me if I'm wrong. But I can't remember in either of the occasions that we got to talk after the games you pitched at Shea Stadium where you thought you even had particularly good stuff. I mean, here you just went right through the opposition lineup, and it seemed that you almost were bent towards being self-deprecating. Is that the way you always felt as a pitcher, that, you know, everything had to be kept at a certain level?
If you've got it working real well, don't brag about it, because it'll always come back and bite you in the rear end. Just go out there and keep your mouth shut and hope it stays that way. Don't get too over enthusiastic, because one of these days it'll always come.
I mean, I literally remember after a 3 or 4 hit shutout you pitched, you sitting at your locker basically saying, I don't know, I had nothing. Were you just playing with us, or did you really feel that in that particular?
One night, I'll give you a for instance, there was a game, I think it was 1978. It might have been 81 or somewhere in there, 82. Was against Philadelphia. And I believe I won the game 3-2. I want to say I had 8 strikeouts and 7 walks. Every time I had runners on base every inning, not just one, maybe 2. I'd have a walk and then a base hit, or a base hit and 2 walks or something. It was a terrible game, but they didn't pull me. They let me pitch. Let me go out there and battle as hard as I could. And, I can't tell you how thrilling that was and how much sense of accomplishment that gave me after that game that night.
I don't know.
Feelings I had.
I don't know if you watch a lot of baseball these days. We'll get back soon enough, never mind these very specific days. But over the last few years, the way the use of pitchers has evolved, and starting pitchers now, basically, you want to pop a champagne cork if you go 5 or 6 innings. But can you see where there might be some room as this game develops in ensuing years to getting back to that kind of mentality, to just allow a pitcher figure his own problems out every once in a while before yanking him in the middle of the game?
When I first signed in 1970 was, I think, a big evolutionary time where relief pitchers were just coming into their own. Up until then, you had guys like Jim Bunning that would go out and throw about 595 innings a year. Then later on, you go back and look at some of his stats, or some of the guys like Carlton or Nolan Ryan or J.R. Richard, or some of those guys that were, real workhorse type people. And then the relievers came along, and you had managers more like Sparky or maybe Earl Weaver in the American League. Of course, I was never over there, and I couldn't tell you, but the utilization was there. They're getting paid to use them. The starting pitchers didn't like it sometimes. We're always out there growling because we want to be left out there to mess up or make up on our own. But if a guy comes in and he bails you out of trouble, that's good. Now, if he goes out there and he loses something in the next inning, well, you want to take a bat to him and the manager. And, but you can't help it. The manager's getting paid his money too. If he do the right move, well, he'll be gone next year.
Yeah. Well, look, Pat alluded to something earlier in this show about the accident, which took the life of his wife, Sharon. And there's been a lot that we've read about that. And I know that you have talked about it somewhat extensively over the years since it's happened. For those who don't know the particulars, what can you tell us about what happened that night?
2 weeks prior, rather 3 weeks prior to our accident, one of my best friends who lives in Oklahoma City had lost his wife 20 years earlier, so approximately 25 years ago. And he had just started dating again, was taking his date home. And at the top step of her porch, on the 5th step, he had an event. He blacked out. And he fell straight back on the concrete sidewalk from a 5-foot height and hit on the side of his head above his ear. And in 2 or 3 weeks' time, they had to cut out a softball-sized section of his skull to relieve the pressure. He was, it still is, he's a real good friend. He's recovered, made a full, almost complete recovery. But as I said, my wife and I drove up. She went shopping with my other friend from Dallas, and we couldn't get in to see him. He's in a coma. So we drove back to Dallas. My wife and I were on our way back to Waco, and I happened to look over at her where she was reading a book, and the sun was just about to go down on the windowsill, and she was leaning this way with the seatbelt around her waist, but not over her shoulder. And I kept looking at her and I said, you know, please put the belt over your shoulders. Now, do me a favor, and I'll feel a whole lot better. And she said, I've only got a couple of pages to go. I'll be finished. And she was giving me that beautiful little half smile. And I remembered thinking that, you know, here it's been 40 years, and there's still nobody else I've ever seen that's as pretty as she is. Still the most beautiful face in the world. And I was looking at her, and the next thing I remembered, I was laying on my door. I had blacked out and rolled doing 80 miles an hour. And she wasn't fastened correctly. And all across here, she was cut open. I got lucky, it just kind of cracked my neck, but she was dead. And next thing I remember, we were being loaded into the helicopter to fly in, and she was gone.
What led to your blackout?
Well, apparently, I didn't know it at the time, but I have epilepsy. And I had an epileptic seizure.
And you'd never had one in your life before that?
Apparently, I'd had one a year before, where I just kind of got dizzy and almost blacked out, but didn't. And apparently it occurred. So now I take a lot of medicine. You remember Gene Wilder and
Sure. Oh yeah, and Blazing Saddles. Yeah.
When they asked him if he shot with this hand, he said, "No, I shoot this one."
Yes.
Well, that's me. I shake, and so I have to take pills for it. Sometimes it's worse than others. Sometimes it doesn't bother me much at all. The other day I was playing golf and I got a little bit too hot, and I bent over to put my tee in the ground and put the ball on the tee, And I started shaking so bad I couldn't put the ball on the tee, and eventually I just kind of blacked out and sat down. And my buddies helped me over to the cart, and I said, "Well, boys, I'm out of here. I'm to the house."
I don't blame
cold
you.
water on my head and went to the house. But I'm slowly but surely getting back into it.
I mean, look, there's medication to deal with epilepsy, but there are no pills to do with or can help with the emotional pain that I'm sure you've gone
through.
With
epilepsy, I don't know that there's anything that you can say that's a definite yes or no on epilepsy. What I've looked up, I haven't been able to find anything. They say it's seizures. You have these, I believe it's called myoclonic or something seizures, and I'm not sure about that. So I'll take the medicine and try to maintain, do what I can.
What you have been able to find, though, is the ability to persevere through the loss that you experienced. How difficult a process has that been?
Son, I cry every day. I cannot think of a day or a night or a morning or evening or afternoon where I don't. When I met Sharon, we were in the Astrodome my rookie year. And one of my best friends who lived right down the street from me, we grew up together from second grade on, was dating her childhood friend. And Sharon was teaching as a school teacher in Houston. And they said, "Hey, we got a guy we want you to meet. He plays baseball with Cincinnati. Come on out and we'll see about a blind date." So after meeting and greeting with all my friends at night, and I went out, but the game was about to begin. They brought her down to say hello, and everybody in the team looked up, and I looked up over the stand, and my jaw just hit the Joe Morgan looked down there at me and he said, "Oh man," he said, "You're done. You're gone. That's it. You're done." And he was right. He was right. That was it. I mean, you could knock me over with a feather.
How has the baseball community helped since the accident, specifically reaching out to you and providing whatever emotional or other kind of assistance they could?
Well, it's been good. People calling, people wishing all the best, but there's not much. I'm not a religious person. I'm sorry, but I'm not. I'm a little more pragmatic, maybe, but possibly one of these days I'll come to terms with it. But right now, I've got a beautiful family situation. I'm here in Austin with my son and his wife and 4 grandsons. My daughter and her family, a beautiful granddaughter, live in Waco, right outside of Waco. So I've got 5 beautiful grandchildren, and can't ask for much more than that. I just wish my wife was here to see them all. She was real good with this kind of stuff. And
well, there's no manual that teaches any of us how to go through stuff like this, but I'm sure we all get strength from the numbers of people who can reach out and can express whatever they can to provide some sort of help. And I know in such small measure, it might not seem like a lot, but it does mean quite a bit to us that, you know, you've reconnected with your Mets family here, because I know what Jay Harwitz has done in the last couple of years to bring the alumni sort of back into the fold of being New York Mets has gone over so well. And for someone like yourself, who, you know, pitched here, 40 years ago now, or thereabouts,
Yeah.
you know, just to come back and to have a connection to the Mets again, it means a lot to us. And I hope it means something special to you as well.
Oh gosh, we used to have so much fun in New York. Going up to the World Trade Centers every year for our anniversary.
Was that right? Yeah.
Oh man, I remember the blackout.
77, yeah, right after you got here.
Right after I got there.
Welcome to New York, pal.
Turn on the headlights so everybody could see to get out of the stadium. Driving up Northern Boulevard with the, you know, all the lights flashing and everything. Everything was blacked out. Oh man, there's just so much stuff that happened there.
So what was your fondest memory as a Met? Does anything come to mind?
Fondest memory?
As a Met, yeah.
Making the All-Star team.
Mm-hmm.
The birth of my son. Anniversary dinners every year. Take a limo up to the trade centers. Just watching my wife walking around in Manhattan and seeing cab drivers and the hack drivers stop and look and wonder at how pretty, like, oh my God, watching her walk by and said, hey, yeah, and she goes on with me every night.
Yeah, really.
That's with me every night. I'm holding her hand.
Well, you know what, Pat? That kind of stuff is forever. And
Yeah.
so is your connection to the New York Mets. And we're just thrilled to have had a chance to talk with you today, and look forward to seeing you when you're able to get to New York and Citi Field and just say hi to the fans again. This has been great. Thank you so much.
I hope to get back to fantasy camp once again and give y'all the wrong signals once more. give you the come ahead when you ought to be staying, you know, give you this still, you know.
That's just a little tiny advertisement for fantasy camp right there, because if you've never been there, trust me, it is absolutely worth it. People like Pat Zachry. Believe me, the fun stuff goes on after the games, doesn't it?
Give you the hot foot and everything else, you know?
See that? A Met forever. Pat Zachry, thanks so much. Stay safe, stay well.
Love you guys in New York. Thank you.
Back at you. Pat Zachry, our guest on One on One. I'm Howie Rose. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Howie.
Pat, that was terrific. Appreciate
it.
Look forward to seeing you in New York, huh?
All right, man.
Okay. Stay well.
Love it.
Take care.